In this video, we're going to talk about the OSWE certification from OffSec. I just passed the exam last week, so I'm going to go through and just give my thoughts about the course and the exam and any tips and tricks that might help you if you're thinking about doing it. First thing to say is there is no expiration on the certification, which is a big plus for me. I really don't like certifications where you have to redo the exam every 3 or 5 years or whatever it is. I mean, the BSCP from Portswigger, I thought it was a great exam. It was really cheap, but it expires after 5 years, and personally, I wouldn't retake it in 5 years' time. I'd rather just get a new certification rather than redoing one I've already done. So unless my company forced me to redo the cert, I just wouldn't bother. I'd just get something else. The cost is very high. So the starting price is £1,300. I think that's like $1.5 thousand, which is super expensive, as OffSec always is, and you can get various options depending on the amount of lab time you want and the subscription type. So I got the Learn 1 subscription, which was through my training budget at work, and I also got it at the end of year sale. So in December, I think each year they do a 20% discount. And that basically gives you 1 year of access to one course. That's why it's called Learn 1. I picked the OSWE because I already have OSCP. And it also gives you 2 exam attempts. Luckily, I only needed 1 in this exam. In the last 2 exams that I did, the BSCP and CPTS, it took me 2 attempts. So I'm glad I got this one done, especially because there's a cool-off period for the exam for retakes, which I'll talk about later as well. There are more expensive options. You can get one that does all of the courses for a year, and I think unlimited exam attempts, but it's $5K or something. I guess if you weren't working, you're probably going to struggle to afford it, but if you didn't have a full-time job and you're able to just grind through all of OffSec certs in a year, that would be pretty cool. Maybe it'd be worth the money. I don't know. What else? We've got proctoring. So the last 2 exams that I did didn't really have proctoring. The CPTS from Hack the Box didn't have any proctoring at all. Portswigger did have proctoring, but it was a weird thing where it just you connect at the start and it checks your system and stuff, and then you disconnect from it during the exam. So I didn't really understand that, but yeah, OffSec is quite invasive. You have to share your screen and your webcam through the whole exam, and that's through your host, not through the VM. So in my case, I have 3 monitors. I have to share all 3 of them. I have to have the webcam on, and you have to tell them every time you go for a break, even if you're just going to the toilet or going to get a drink of water or something, you have to say, I'm going. You don't have to wait for them to respond, but you have to say, I'm leaving now, and tell them whenever you're starting again. You can also shut everything off, so shut off the screen sharing and the webcam and stuff like that. But again, you need to let them know when you're leaving and when you come back, and you'll have to log in and reconfigure the software again. So if you have multiple monitors, you have to set those up and log in and stuff like that. So I only logged off whenever I went to sleep, otherwise I would just leave everything running. You also need to show your ID at the start. My webcam actually wasn't good quality enough to show the ID, so I just had to show them a screenshot of it instead. So check that beforehand and be prepared in case you need to. You also need to give them a tour of the room with a webcam, which was difficult for me because I didn't really have a very long cable on my webcam, and they wanted to see under my desk and stuff like that. And yeah, it was a bit of a stretch, but I've just about managed to do it. I guess they want to make sure there's nobody hiding under your desk giving you answers or whatever. You're also not allowed phones, laptops, tablets, smartwatches and stuff like that around your desk, so just be aware of that. If they see you sitting messaging on your phone in the middle of the exam, you might get in some trouble. There's many other requirements, so what type of OS and browser and stuff, and technical requirements, whatever. Go and check the full frequently asked questions, which I'll leave in the description as well. Exam conditions, no cheating, obviously. If you get caught cheating, and I think even if you leak the course content, so you'll get a PDF you can download with the modules in it, and it has a watermark on it, and if that gets leaked and then OffSec find out about it, I'm pretty sure they can ban you and revoke your certifications. So yeah, just be super careful with all that stuff. And you can't use BERT Pro in the exam, you can't use SQL map or vuln scanners, and there's a lot of automated tools that you can't use. So again, I'll leave a link in the description. Just make sure you check out the full list of what is not allowed in the exam. You also can't use LLMs like ChatGPT, which is pretty annoying if you want some help scripting, because there's quite a lot of coding in this exam. But just make sure you prepare during a course that you're going to need to be able to code stuff live, and you're not going to be able to get help from an LLM. The only exception to that is sometimes whenever you go on Google and you type something in, it comes up with an LLM AI summary of something or answers your question. That's allowed because it's unavoidable, right? You can't stop Google from giving you that AI summary. You also can't copy source code from the exam machines or remote mount the source code. You've got to do everything over RDP, and I'll give some tips for that later because this part is super annoying. I really like, if there's one thing I could change about the exam, I mean, I don't like the proctoring, but I don't like this even more. And requirements, so there's a lot of requirements. Again, you should go and check out because I don't want to miss something and somebody says, oh, CryptoCat didn't say this in his video and now I'm going to fail the exam. But you need to be able to verify your ID. You obviously need a webcam. You need technical skills to complete the exam. You're going to need some English skills, like for writing a report. You need a professional report, something similar to like the OSCP or CPTS if you've done that. And you need to just make sure that your system is up to spec as well. I would recommend using, I think maybe you have to use a VM for the exam. I'm not 100% sure. I use Kali Linux even though I'm used to Parrot OS because it's what's recommended, and my Parrot OS has like Burt Pro and stuff on it. I just wanted to use like a fresh VM, which I wasn't going to have any problems with. And that's about the certification. Let's talk about the course. So, who's the course for? It's aimed at aspiring web app pen testers, bug bounty hunters, maybe developers who are looking to increase their understanding of web security. And it is a white box focused course. So there's a heavy emphasis on source code analysis, remote debugging, and automation. So that's like scripting those one-click exploit chains that I talked about. Some of the vulnerabilities covered include auth bypass, like weak predictable tokens, IDOR, XSS, CSRF, CORS, SQL injection, command injection, code injection, so like unsafe use of eval, deserialization, which might be PHP, Java, Python, .NET, server-side prototype pollution, server-side template injection, XXE, SSRF, insecure file upload, and WAF bypass techniques, and also just a lot of different tools, methodologies, and tips, especially for the analysis and the debugging parts. Each module has a written section and accompanying videos and a lab machine to work through. There are exercises along with it, so you complete a section in the module, and then it'll suggest an exercise to do, and maybe an extra mile as well, which are more difficult, and people recommend doing those to make sure you're properly ready for the exam. I probably did about half of those, but it is recommended. When you finish the course, there are a handful of labs, I think between like 5 and 10. Some of them are retired, but you should still do them anyway. And they have no walkthrough or information, so these are designed to be like practice exams, and you should treat them as such. Make sure you don't use ChatGPT during it, or automate tools like SQL Map that you're not going to be able to use in the exam. In terms of support, you can get support from Discord or the OffSec forums. I'll leave the links in the description. And on Discord, you want to link your OffSec account to Discord so that you get access to the extra channels. So once you have the course, you link your account and then you'll get access to 3 OSWE related channels where you can discuss the modules and the labs and ask questions about the exam and stuff. You're not going to get many answers in terms of the extra miles or the exam, but everything else is fair game. And there are student mentors on there who work for OffSec who will be there to provide official support. Discord is also a great place to find a study partner, so you might find somebody who's working on the same course at the same time, and you can discuss the modules and share your tips and solutions for the labs, things like that. I was working quite a lot with Light the Mad, who also passed the exam on the same month as me, so congrats to them. So what about the exam? It is obviously white box because the course is as well. There's a focus on remote debugging, and you have 72 hours total. The first 48 hours is going to be hacking, so you're going to have access to those exam machines. The last 24 hours, you won't have access to those machines, and it's just for writing the report. So in those first 48 hours, that's when you need to get the flags, and you'll have 5 machines in total. There'll be 2 vulnerable web apps that you need to pwn, and there are 2 flags on each one. And then you also have 2 debug machines, so they are the exact same replica of those vulnerable web apps. The difference is you'll have SSH access, or you'll have some debugging set up that you'll be able to debug things locally, but there won't be any flags on there, so you just need to exploit those debug machines, and then you can repeat your exploit on the main web apps that they give you, and that's where you'll get the flags from. You also have a Kali Linux VM to work with, and I recommend testing your exploits from here at the end, because there might be some slight differences. It's going to be on the same network and things like that. So yeah, get your exploits working on the debug machines. When they're working, you'll run them against the web apps to get your flags. And then towards the end of the exam, or earlier if you want, you'll want to just go and test those one-click pwn scripts on the official Kali Linux VM that they give you to work with. About the actual web apps you have to pwn, so you start off unauthenticated, and in order to get the first flag, the local.txt, you need to get yourself to admin privileges, and that will give you 35 points. And then from there, you need to gain remote code execution to get the proof.txt, and that will give you 15 points. So you should try and get a shell there. I'm not actually sure if it's 100% a requirement. I did go for the reverse shell, but I've heard people saying as long as you get the remote code execution and your script will print the proof.txt for the examiner, that should be enough. You need 85 points to pass. That means you need to get 3 out of 4 flags. You're going to need to complete one of the boxes completely, and then the other box, you'll need to at least get the admin user. You don't necessarily need to get RCE, but obviously it's recommended. At the end, you will need to script the entire exploit chain into a single-click script. So I've talked about this a lot. Just make sure you get this in your head. The examiner will run your script, and it should do everything from unauth to reverse shell. It should print out the flags and stuff like that in the process. And you want to make sure that's like reusable, that you can provide command line parameters, so like the username that it wants to set up, the IP address that the shell will connect back to, the host name, all that sort of stuff. Restrictions. So I've mentioned this already. Some automated tools are banned. You can't use SQL map, vulnerability scanners, things like that. No BERT Pro, no LLMs. Everything has to be done over the RDP connection. So it means you can't copy any of the source code or remote mount it. And as I've said previously as well, OffSec are very strict on the exam requirements. If you don't follow the instructions carefully, they will fail you. And if you cheat, there will be a lot of trouble. So just make sure you read through all of the links in the description of this video about what all of the requirements are. So that's the exam. What about the report? So you've done the first 48 hours, you've got enough points to pass, you've got all those flags, and you've done your one-click scripts and stuff like that. You also want to make sure that you've done all of your screenshots and your notes and stuff, because you're not going to have access to those exam machines while you're doing the report. So just make sure you've collected everything that you need for this final reporting stage. And you should put everything in a single PDF, so you're not going to be able to send like script files and different documents to them. Everything has to be in one file, and you need to check the requirements carefully. So they require a professional report, similar to OSCP. I've mentioned this already, but also like CPTS, if you've done that, it has to be like a proper pen testing report. And failing to provide screenshots of the local and proof.txt on the system will mean you might fail. The same, you also need to provide it in text format, and you need a full working automation script that's going to do everything. It needs to print the local and or the proof.txt, unless you get shell. So you can't hard code anything in those POC scripts. You want to make sure that everything is automated and you're not just like hard coding credentials and things like that. What to include in the report? So you can actually download a Word template from OffSec for the exam. I'll leave a link in the description to that. And it should have your email, your OffSec ID, and an MD5 hash that they give you, which will be linked to your account. And then obviously the write-up for both machines. So you want to include the local and the proof.txt in text format. You want to give a description of each vulnerability you found with step-by-step instructions. So screenshots, code snippets, things like that. Any scripts that you wrote while you were developing your exploit. And then you also need to add a section with a one-click script with any instructions like how to run it, what the parameters are, any other notes that might be important to the examiner. And you also need to provide the local and proof.txt as screenshots, so show a screenshot of it in the web app. And also they say that it should show it in burp as well. So I just threw everything in here, just be careful, just so they had no excuse to fail me, basically. You also want to provide full steps to exploit. So I just did this as like a TLDR at the end of the section because I did the vulnerability descriptions very detailed, loads of screenshots. When it got to the full steps to exploit, I basically just put a bullet points of like, here's every step that's required in order to manually exploit this. You might choose to add more than that, but that is the basic requirements. That's what they've got in the template. As for the format, I used Obsidian, so I like it because you can write everything in Markdown. And then at the end, you can just export the whole document in PDF, and it formats the code and stuff very well. You use like code blocks with the language in it, so it'll give you a nice syntax highlight and it's easy to copy and paste. If you want to add links and stuff, they'll show up nicely in a PDF. Just remember it has to be a single document. That's the most important thing there. And you might choose to do this in Word or use some other... I use like Cherry Tree for my OSCP several years ago, but I prefer Obsidian because of the Markdown support. Some tips. You should take notes as you go. I took a lot of notes also with Obsidian with like scripts and payloads I was trying and just like notes about my enumeration, recon and all that, just so I could copy and paste it to the final document later. People also recommend taking screenshots as you go. I actually didn't do this, but just remember, you're not going to have time to do this during the reporting phase. So the way I did it is I took lots of notes with Obsidian, and then once I had enough points to pass, I went back and started manually going over the vulnerabilities, taking extra notes I needed, and getting all of the screenshots that I would need for the exam report. One thing here is if you keep your burp history and take VM snapshots, which I recommend doing as well, if the exam ends and there's some screenshot you want to get, you might be able to just go into the burp history, select the request that you're interested in, go to the response, and then show response in browser. And then it'll actually render that page as long as it doesn't need to go and fetch anything extra. So that's one tip. If you forget something, you might be able to visualize it later, but obviously you're not going to have access to the RDP for the exams at this stage. So how do you prepare for the exam? Well, it should go out that saying, but you need to complete all of the module contents. Make sure you go through all of the text, all of the videos, and you complete all of the exercises and make those proof of concept scripts as you're doing it because they'll be reusable whenever it comes to the exam. You should obviously take lots of notes and watch the videos that come with it. You should do all of the final labs. Don't use ChatGPT and make sure you make those reusable one-click scripts with all of the functionality that you might want to put into your exam scripts. Ideally, you should also do all of the extra miles. You won't get help for those, unfortunately, but they are recommended. You should complete the retired and archived modules. I did do this, but I didn't put as much time in them as the live modules as well. I did do all of the retired final labs, and I would recommend that. Like, some of them are black box because I guess the old exam was slightly different, or the old course, but it's also really good practice. There's still similar vulnerabilities that you're going to find in the general labs and exam stuff. Portswigger labs are also great practice for all things web hacking. It's largely black box, though. I mean, you'll have access to JavaScript source code and stuff, but you don't have access to the back-end source code like you will in the OSWE. I didn't do this because I did my BSCP last year, so I'd gone over all of the labs in Portswigger again, probably for the second or third time over the past whatever amount of years, and I didn't really need to go through and do that again. But if you haven't done that, I would definitely recommend it. And if your web experience and knowledge is really minimal, you might want to do the DVWA, the Down Vulnerable Web Application, first, or if you just need a refresher before you start the OSWE course. I made a video series for that about 4 or 5 years ago. It's not great quality, but yeah, I mean, the content's there anyway if it helps. You could also do some OSWE-like labs on Hack the Box or VulnHub or something like that, or just the web challenges on Hack the Box. I didn't do that this time. I just focused on the OSWE modules, really. The only extra supplemental labs that I did were the 4 labs that William Moody made, and I'll link those in the description as well. There's blind, SQLI, and cross-site scripting, and just some examples of things that you'll see in the OSWE and that you might want to script some exploits for in preparation for the exam. You could also play CTFs, so do the web categories in CTFs. The good quality ones, you'll normally have source code to download as well, so it's white box, again, great practice. And insecure code exercises. So Farah recommended a website called Code Review Lab, which gives you a spot the vulnerability challenge each day. So a different programming language has a vulnerability in it. You need to spot that vulnerability. So obviously you want to get good at code reviews, and this is a good way to do it. You should practice your coding and scripting. You will need to write comprehensive scripts to do the autopwn, so there could be hundreds of lines. I think even for the OSWE modules, I had some one-click scripts that were 300-400 lines of code, so make sure you get plenty of practice with that. You should get familiar with different languages, so you can use Project Euler, or codewars.com is probably even better. As an option, it has challenges to complete, and you can complete them in any programming language, so if you feel you're really lacking in Java or Python, something like that, you can go and do some exercises there. I did all of my scripts in Python. I'm sure that's the case with most people, but you still want to be able to do things in PHP and JavaScript, and even Java and C#. These are all languages that might come up in the exam. They're definitely going to come up in the course, and you should be familiar with how to decompile things, how to debug, how to spot the vulnerabilities in the code. Get used to modularizing code as well, so setting up options and arguments. You shouldn't be hard coding anything in the scripts, but you should use defaults. So I would like set up the argument parser in Python with like, it'll take in the host name, it'll take in the username that you want, the password, the email, the I can't really think what else, the reverse shell like port and IP address, maybe some other things. But I would always put a default option there because maybe they're going to use the same like host name, or they don't mind the default username being like cat. In fact, what I would do is do a default username and then I add a random number to it, because also maybe you keep running a script and it needs to register an account. And if the account already exists, it's going to cause some issues. So that's also a good idea. I recommend also adding a burp proxy option to your script so that you can just like add a -- proxy flag, and then it will send all of your traffic through burp. That makes it really handy for debugging any issues that you come across. And you can also add a debug option and maybe have like a lot of print statements set up that only print whenever the debug option is set. So you can have like a quiet mode and then like a debug mode. Also, using try catch and print statements around the place just to help with the debugging and resistance to errors. You should prepare the useful tool repos, common payloads, important notes, things like that. revshells.com is also great, so you can get like reverse shells in all different languages. Sometimes some shells might work on some boxes and then others on another box, so that's really good to have. Make sure you know about different like encoding types and ways to bypass WAF filters and things like that. Tips and tricks. So I asked ChatGPT to give me a cheat sheet reference, so things like SQLi payloads, XSS payloads, Beautiful Soup 4 for like extracting stuff from web pages, regex, things like that. I didn't use them really in the exam, to be honest, but they're handy to have just in case. You're not going to be able to use ChatGPT during the exam, but there's no harm in using it to prepare things for the exam. So the same goes for code templates. You can use ChatGPT to generate boilerplate scripts like a boilerplate blind SQLi script, or even just a script to register users and log in and things like that, set up proxies, do arguments. There's a lot of things which you might want to just be able to copy and paste during the exam rather than typing out manually. You can also look for existing GitHub repos that have these boilerplate scripts and cheat sheets. Again, I'll link some in the description. There is one, in fact, there's a couple. I did the same with BSCP, where you can find like cheat sheets online which will give you a list of the vulnerabilities that might come up as the initial vulnerability, and then also with the Privesc or the RCE vulnerability. So, I mean, OffSec tell you what the syllabus is, right? So you can have a look at what vulnerabilities are covered, and some of the vulnerabilities might come up for the local.txt flag, and then some of the others might come up for the proof.txt flag. So you can basically calculate what is, not what is likely to come up, but what could possibly come up. Remote debugging, it's a big part of the course and it'll help you a lot in the exam, so make sure you practice this properly when you're doing the course modules and the labs. I wish I did this more, because when it came to the exam I neglected it towards the start, and I was like recreating code in local interpreters and things like that, and eventually I ended up just having to start doing the remote debugging, setting up loads of breakpoints, and yeah, it really helped. So make sure that's something that you've got down. You should take lots of notes during the exam. I mentioned this already, but take notes and screenshots because you're not going to have access to the exam boxes during the reporting phase. Personally, I took a lot of detailed notes, and then when I got enough points, I went back and took the screenshots. And as I mentioned as well, you can take plenty of VM snapshots and keep your burp histories that you can go back and check stuff if you need to after the exam finishes. Revert and verify. So once you get your one-click script working, make sure you revert the VMs and try again. You might find that they no longer work and you have to do some debugging. And you also want to try your scripts from the official Kali VM provided over remote SSH, because it might behave differently. Maybe there's some different latency and stuff like that, or I don't know. Could be some other issues which you just want to make sure that when the examiner runs it, I'm assuming that's what they're going to run it from, that your script works first time, because they don't want to contact you and ask you to help them debug the script. They just want to make sure that they both run and print out the local.txt, get a shell, whatever. Some general tips. So remember to schedule the exam in advance, as the slots fill up quickly, especially at the weekend, and you can always change the date later if you aren't ready. I booked it about 2 or 3 weeks before I did the exam. And keep calm during exam, beware of rabbit holes. So you'll see a lot of rabbit holes on the course, on the labs. You know, there might be a lot of different functionality, and all of it looks vulnerable, and you have to really dig into each component to see which one is the intended vulnerability Or maybe there's multiple routes as well. You do find that in the lab machines quite often, is there are multiple ways to solve a box. If you spend a lot of time on a certain piece of functionality, you're not getting anywhere, you're going around in circles, take a break, go and look at some other functionality, or switch to the other box and try and break things up a bit, clear your head. One really important tip is use the rdesktop command that was provided. So I used X3 RDP for the first quarter of the exam, 5 or 6 hours. And it was taking about 10 seconds to register each click. So it was unbearable. I kept messaging the OffSec support and they're like, we can't help you with the exam. I'm like, I don't need help with the exam, but it'd be really nice if it didn't take 10 seconds for me to click each button in VS Code. And yeah, it was just making things impossible. So I eventually swapped to the rdesktop command that they gave, and it was literally 10 times faster. Still slow, but it was 1 second per click rather than 10 seconds. The only thing there was I could no longer copy and paste or resize the RDP window, which was kind of annoying, but at least I was able to do things kind of quickly. You can also remember, if you have access to the debug boxes that are the same as the actual web apps, and some things you could do, you could SSH over to the box and start grepping for code rather than using VS Code for everything. You could also, because you have access to the database, you can go and have a look and see how the database looks, what the different fields and things are, how your input looks whenever it goes into the database, and you can even go and modify things in there. So let's say you are stuck on the first phase getting access to the admin, and you've been trying for ages, and you think, I want to try something else, I want to move on to something else, and maybe try and get RCE. Well, what you could do is just go into the database manually on your debug box, and then just set the password hash for the admin to be the same password hash as your user, and then you can just log in as the admin and maybe just start working on the RCE. You get that working, you get your proof.txt, and then you go back and work on the first phase. So if you find that you're just completely stuck on one part, because this is the problem with these exams, right? They're always linear. In order to even look at the RCE, you need to first do the user to admin or unauth to admin phase. But with this exam, because you have access to the debug box, that's not really the case. You can actually just go and try any of the 4 possible flags whenever you want, really. Okay, on to some frequently asked questions and some questions that I specifically got from people on Twitter and Discord and LinkedIn and stuff. So one of the common questions is, how hard is the exam? This is the most difficult question to answer because it's so subjective. I think the final labs are a good example of what to expect in the exam, as are the course modules and the exercise and the extra miles. However, you have to bear in mind that with the exam pressure, the time-limited stuff, and the use of RDP for everything, that makes it a lot more difficult. However, as I say, it's subjective. If you have little to no web experience, it's obviously going to be a lot harder than someone who's done loads of web certifications or works as a web app pen tester or a bug bounty hunter. That said, I did find the exam to be challenging, and there were times where I thought I might end up repeating it like I did my last 2 certifications, but luckily it didn't happen. How long does it take to prepare? Again, subjective. OffSec says the course material in labs is an estimated, 427 hours, which is over 10 weeks of full-time studying. However, if you've never attacked a web app, used a debugger, you have no programming experience, it's obviously going to take a lot longer than that. On the other hand, if you have loads of certifications or experience, I already had OSCP, CPTS, BSCP, I work in web security, I have a undergrad, master's, PhD, and I've worked in a lot of security roles. So it's if you already have all of that experience, you can't expect somebody who has never looked at a CTF or has no academic background in computing to find it as easy. And apart from that, everyone's different. So even if you have all the same qualifications and experience as someone else, we've all got different learning styles, we learn at different speeds, and we all deal with exam pressure differently. And you might just get unlucky. You might get some boxes in the exam that you weren't prepared for, and somebody else might have got some boxes which you would have been prepared for. Do you need programming knowledge? I've talked about this already during the video, but yes, you definitely need programming knowledge. You will need to analyze web apps in various languages and be familiar with debugging. You also need to be able to write those one-click scripts without any AI assistance. So you can learn this as you go through the course, but I recommend Code Wars and Code Review Lab for practicing the coding and the code reviews. What if I fail the exam? This is kind of annoying. I didn't realize this until close to my exam time that there's a cooldown. So if you fail the exam, you have to wait 4 weeks before you can do it again. If you fail the second attempt, you have to wait 8 weeks. If you fail the third, you have to wait 12 weeks, etc. The retakes are expensive as well, so if you have Learn 1, you get 2 attempts. If you have the most expensive subscription, you get unlimited retakes. But for anybody else, be prepared to pay a lot of money for the exam retakes. So yeah, luckily I passed this one first time. That wasn't the case for me with CPTS or BSCP, although it really should have been for BSCP, but I don't deal with exam pressure very well, to be honest. And if you do fail, just make sure you learn from it, make sure you find out where you went wrong, revisit the modules and the topics that you struggled with, practice more coding and debugging, play more CTFs and hack the box, things like that. Is the course contents enough to pass? Yes, I only use the course contents and a couple of those labs from William Moody, but just make sure to read all of the modules, watch all of the videos, do all the lab exercises, extra miles, things like that, take good notes, write scripts that you can reuse, and you should be good. Now, having said that, I did already have experience before that. I'd already done the BSCP, so I've been through all of the Portswigger labs. If I hadn't have done that, I would probably have done this before doing the OSWE. And remember, the BSCP is quite cheap as well. I think it's like under £100 to do the exam. So if you do the Portswigger labs, you can get like 2 certifications for the price of 1 here, pretty much. And apparently the BSCP is similar to OSWE by OffSec. Like, they're both black box certifications, web hacking, but the BSCP is much cheaper. And I think Portswigger labs are really the gold standard of web app security, to be honest, in terms of like practical learning. And they're all free to do. In terms of the study and methodology, everybody's different. For me, I would go through each module, I would read through all of the contents, and then I would, for each section in the module, I would read it, I would take notes, I would do the exercises, and I'd move on to the next part, and I'd go through all the way through the module, and then I would go and watch all of the videos for the module, and I would be looking at the notes that I've written while I watch the videos, and just see, is there anything missing here? Can I shorten anything? Can I add anything? And that was basically my process. Some more questions I got from the community. How outdated is the course and exam? So you hear a lot of people complaining that OffSec is quite outdated. Maybe that's the case with the OSCP and probably the exploit development ones. I think when people talk about the outdated courses, they're mostly talking about exploit development, which has changed quite a lot over the years. But I didn't really find that with this course, to be honest. I mean, I talked earlier about the vulnerabilities that are included. You can go and have a look at the OffSec syllabus, go and download that for OSWE. And I mean, all of those vulnerabilities are still very prevalent. Maybe some of the apps aren't particularly new, but I don't think the content was irrelevant in any way. And all of the stuff on the tools, decompilation, debugging is obviously important as well. I mean, it's clearly not a brand new course, but yeah, I didn't go through it thinking, oh wow, this is out of date. They have also updated it, obviously, so there are some modules that have been retired. They've probably added new ones quite recently, so maybe other people have different experiences for that reason. Somebody else asked me, do you have to use Kali? Again, apparently not, but it is recommended. I normally use Pirate OS, but I just made a new Kali Linux VM specifically for this course and exam. So, some final thoughts and feedback. The pros of this certification are it's highly recognized in the industry. OffSec are like the gold standard. Well, I say the gold standard, they're just the most recognized. I wouldn't say their courses are the best value. Like, I think the CPTS was more difficult, more comprehensive, and also way cheaper than the OSCP. But it just doesn't look the same in your CV. It doesn't look as good in interviews. It might help you get through the interview more than the OSCP would because of the technical skills you're going to learn. But in terms of getting into the interview in the first place, OffSec certifications are really the best for your resume. It is white box focused, which I think is cool. There are not many web certs like this. If you look at the BSCP, the CBBH, things like that, they are black box focused, which is also really good. I mean, like, if you want to get good at bug bounty, you generally don't have the source code provided. So I'm not saying those certs aren't good, but it's also good to get used to reviewing and debugging code, which this course definitely prepares you for. Another pro is there's no expiration date. Again, I hate certs that have those expiration dates on them. The cons, well, it's super expensive. Ideally, you want your employer to pay for it. It's not as good value as other certs, as I've mentioned, like BSCP and CBBH. I think the proctoring is super invasive, and the other exam restrictions are annoying, like everything via RDP, no copying source, no using AI. I really don't like this. I mean, the other certifications that I've done from Hack the Box and from Portswigger did not have these requirements, and I don't think I learnt less during them. And just having like a webcam on the whole time and sharing all of your screens, I don't really like it. But I understand why that's a requirement as well. I also think the repeat exams are too expensive. The cooldown's pretty stupid. If I failed, I wouldn't have had the chance to repeat this until I came back to the UK, which would be in a few months' time. I need to study and revise a lot, so yeah, I don't really like that either. There are some small other critiques, I'll give those in a minute, but I think those are the main pros and cons as far as I see them. What about compared to other certifications? Well, I think it was more difficult than the OSCP and the BSCP. It's probably less difficult for me than CPTS, but they're quite different, right? The CPTS has got Active Directory, privilege escalation, pivoting, all the network enumeration, things like that. It's also very different to OSCP. I think the closest that I've done is BSCP, but again, it's white box versus black box. There's a lot of code review, debugging, scripting, and I think it's more realistic as just like an actual web app pen testing cert. OSWE is quite like isolated vulnerabilities and really focused on using Burp Suite Pro. Again, I haven't done the OSWE. I hear it's more like BSCP as well. I also didn't do the CBBH. I finished the course, but didn't do the exam. But I would expect it to be more like the OSWE BSCP as well, seen as bug bounty is not generally white box focused. Overall, I enjoyed it. I learned a lot. I would recommend it if you can get your employer to pay for it, or if you've already done all of the easier and cheaper certs and you just want to boost your resume or get some more experience. I think the support on Discord was pretty good, but you can't get help with everything, like the extra miles, and even on the forum, it's hard to find some of that info. And some minor annoyances, so alright, I'm not going to put these in the cons section, but there were a couple of things that just slightly annoyed me as I was going through the course. One is whenever you're watching the videos, it resets the volume every time the next one loads. I get regularly logged out of the website, so I might have like loads of tabs open, let's say 5, 6 tabs of different modules and videos and things like that. And then I'll go back to start looking through it, and then it's like, oh, you've been logged out. You're logged out of every tab, and then you have to go and find the modules again and find your place in all of those modules, which, I don't know, why can't they just have it set to like remember me for a week or a month or something? I don't know. But that was quite annoying. VPN addresses changing is also annoying, so you have to keep updating your host file, and if IP address of your VPN changes, then you need to go and update all of your payloads and scripts in your notes, which again is annoying, although you should really be adding those argument parser options to your scripts anyway, so that you can provide those and just update the default. You can't see the lab progress, so one thing that was annoying is at the end of the course, when you do those practical labs without like the exam style labs, you can submit a local and a proof.txt for each one of them, and I did that for all of them, but I guess on one of them I was logged out, my session had expired, and it didn't actually register me submitting the flag. So I got to like 99.8% through the course, and it just said you're missing one flag, but there was no way of me finding out which ones I'd finished and which ones I hadn't, so I had to boot up every lab one by one, go and repeat all of the exploits, and submit the flag until one of them actually worked. So yeah, it would be good if it just showed you what your progress was in the labs. I don't really understand that. That's about it. I don't think there are any other annoyances apart from like the RDP stuff as well that you had to use in the exam. What's next for me? Well, I would like to do the OSED to get better at exploit development and, yeah, get that on the CV as well, but it'll probably be next year before I do it. Maybe I'll look out for the end of year sale again. And I don't really want to do the OSEP, but once I've got the OSWE and OSED, I think I'll probably just do it anyway for the OSCE3 title, where you have all 3 of those certs. And in the meantime, I'm going to try and put some of these OSWE skills into practice, spend a bit more time on bug bounty, and just keep playing CTFs as usual. Anyway, I hope this was helpful. Check out the video description for links to useful resources and all of the OffSec related stuff. And if you've taken the exam, let us know your thoughts in the comments. Do my experiences match yours? Do you have any insights that I've missed? Any questions? If you leave a question in the comments, I'll try and get through to it. Obviously, I can't give any help with the exam. Don't DM me on Discord saying you're doing the exam, you need help. I can't reveal any information about it, and I won't do so. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have any questions or comments, leave them down below. Thanks.